My name is Sarah Michelle Thompson, and the words my father spoke at his retirement dinner still echo in my mind like a slap across the face. 20 years you've wasted playing soldier when you could have built something real here at home. The entire VFW hall fell silent as 200 guests turned to stare at me, their faces a mixture of shock and pity. I stood there in my dress blue uniform, the same uniform I'd worn while serving in 3 combat zones, the same uniform that had earned me a Bronze Star and Purple Heart, feeling smaller than I had since I was 8 years old, being scolded for getting grease on my church dress. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in exactly 18 hours, my phone would ring with news that would change everything. The Secretary of Defense himself would be calling to inform me that I had been nominated for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military position a woman like me from Cedar Falls, Iowa could ever dream of achieving. But in that moment, standing in front of my hometown with my father's words hanging in the air like smoke from his retirement barbecue, all I could think about was how I'd spent 2 decades trying to prove myself to a man who would never see my worth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the eldest child in the Thompson family meant understanding from an early age that grease under your fingernails was a badge of honor and the sound of air wrenches was the family lullaby. Thompson's Auto Repair had been my grandfather's legacy, passed down to my father Bob Thompson, who had expanded it from a single-bay garage to the largest automotive service center in Cedar Falls. Our 3-story farmhouse on Elm Street sat just 2 blocks from the shop, close enough that I could hear the hydraulic lifts working late into the evening when Dad took on extra jobs to save for our college funds. My childhood was spent equally between helping Mom in her vegetable garden and learning to change oil filters alongside my younger siblings Jake and Emma. While other girls my age were playing with dolls, I was learning the difference between a socket wrench and a box wrench, memorizing the locations of brake lines and transmission fluids. Dad would beam with pride when I could diagnose a rattling noise or spot a worn brake pad before my teenage brothers could even pop the hood. "That's my girl," he'd say, ruffling my hair with hands that permanently smelled of motor oil and determination. "Got the Thompson touch for sure." Our family dinners around the oak table that Dad had built himself were filled with talk of expansion plans, new equipment purchases, and which of us kids showed the most promise for eventually taking over the business. It was never a question of if one of us would inherit Thompson's Auto Repair, only a matter of which one Dad deemed worthy of carrying on 3 generations of automotive excellence. Jake, 2 years younger than me, preferred computers to carburetors and spent most of his free time teaching himself programming languages instead of transmission repair. Emma, the baby of the family at 4 years younger, gravitated toward books and helping at the local elementary school during summer breaks. That left me, Sarah, the daughter who could rebuild an engine as easily as I could braid my own hair, the obvious choice to continue the family legacy. The expectation settled on my shoulders like a familiar coat, warm and comfortable but increasingly restrictive as I grew older. During my junior year of high school, when college recruiters started visiting our guidance counselor's office, Dad would dismiss any mention of universities outside of Iowa. "Why would you want to leave Cedar Falls?" he'd ask, genuinely confused. "Everything you need is right here. The business is here, your family is here, your future is here." But something inside me yearned for horizons beyond the cornfields that surrounded our small town. I loved working alongside Dad, loved the satisfaction of solving mechanical puzzles and the grateful smiles of customers when we fixed their transportation lifelines. Yet every time I looked at the map of the United States hanging in our high school's career counseling office, my eyes would drift to places I'd only read about in books, countries I'd only seen in documentaries. The turning point came during the fall of my senior year when Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez visited our school for a military career presentation. She stood before our assembled class in her crisp Army dress uniform, medals catching the fluorescent lights, speaking about leadership opportunities and seeing the world while serving something greater than yourself. When she mentioned the Army's automotive maintenance programs and the possibility of working on everything from Humvees to helicopters, I felt a spark of excitement I'd never experienced while changing oil on Mrs. Peterson's Toyota Camry. After her presentation, I lingered in the hallway, finally working up the courage to approach her. "Excuse me, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "I had some questions about the technical programs you mentioned." She turned to me with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. "Of course, what would you like to know?" For the next 30 minutes, she painted a picture of military service that combined my love of mechanical work with opportunities for leadership, education, and travel that Cedar Falls could never provide. She told me about women who had started as mechanics and risen to become officers, about the advanced training programs that would let me work on million-dollar aircraft engines, about the possibility of using military experience as a stepping stone to civilian careers I'd never even imagined. "The Army needs smart, dedicated people like you," she said as our conversation wound down. "Have you ever considered that your mechanical skills could take you places your hometown never could?" That evening at dinner, I waited until Dad had finished describing his plans for expanding the shop's transmission services before taking a deep breath and changing the course of my entire life. "Dad, I met with a military recruiter today," I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm thinking about joining the Army after graduation." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, a piece of Mom's famous meatloaf suspended in midair as he processed what I'd just said. Jake looked up from his phone with surprise, while Emma stopped chattering about her upcoming school play to stare at me with wide eyes. "You're thinking about what now?" Dad's voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, something between disbelief and disappointment. "The Army has excellent technical training programs," I explained, pulling out the brochure Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had given me. "I could work on aircraft engines, heavy machinery, get leadership experience, and they'll help pay for college afterward." Dad set down his fork with deliberate care, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching anger. "Sarah Michelle Thompson, we have built something real here. 3 generations of Thompsons have poured their hearts into this business, and you want to throw that away to go play soldier?" "It's not playing, Dad," I protested, feeling my own frustration rising. "It's serving our country. It's using the skills you taught me in ways that matter." "The skills I taught you matter right here," he shot back, his voice rising with each word. "You think fixing some general's Jeep is more important than taking care of the people in your own community? The people who've supported this family for decades?" Mom reached across the table to place a calming hand on Dad's arm. "Bob, let her explain what she's thinking," she said gently, though I could see the worry in her eyes. But Dad was already shaking his head, his decision made before I'd even finished explaining my reasoning. "Linda, don't encourage this nonsense. Sarah's just got some romantic notion about military life from watching too many movies. She'll get over it." The dismissal stung worse than outright anger would have. To him, my carefully considered decision was nothing more than a teenage whim, unworthy of serious discussion. "What if I don't get over it?" I asked quietly. "What if this is what I really want to do with my life?" Dad leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same expression he wore when diagnosing a particularly stubborn engine problem. "Then, you're not the daughter I thought I raised," he said finally. "The Sarah I know wouldn't abandon her family's legacy for some fantasy about military glory." The conversation ended there, but the tension it created settled over our household like a storm cloud that refused to clear. In the weeks that followed, Dad alternated between pretending our discussion had never happened and making pointed comments about family loyalty and responsibility. He started talking more frequently about the shop's future, about the new equipment he was planning to purchase, about how much he was looking forward to teaching his eldest daughter advanced automotive systems. Each comment felt like another weight added to the expectations that were already threatening to crush my dreams. I found myself torn between the love I felt for my family and the calling I felt toward something larger than myself. The brochures from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez remained hidden in my bedroom, but I read them so many times that I had memorized every program description and education benefit. 3 weeks before graduation, I made a decision that would define the next 20 years of my life. Without telling anyone in my family, I drove to the Army recruiting station in nearby Waterloo and signed my enlistment papers. The recruiter, a kind woman named Sergeant First Class Johnson, walked me through every detail of my 8-year commitment and helped me understand exactly what I was choosing. "You sure about this, Thompson?" she asked as I signed the final document. "Military life isn't easy, especially for someone leaving a close family behind." I thought about Dad's dismissive comments, about the way he'd refused to even consider that I might want something different than the life he'd planned for me. "I'm sure," I said, my signature flowing across the page with more confidence than I felt. The night before graduation, I finally told my family what I'd done. The explosion that followed made our earlier dinner conversation seem like a gentle disagreement. Dad accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, of throwing away everything he'd worked to build. Mom cried, asking how she'd failed as a mother to raise a daughter who would choose strangers over family. Jake and Emma watched in shocked silence as 20 years of family harmony shattered around our dining room table. "You want to go play soldier?" Dad shouted, his face red with anger and hurt. "Fine. But don't expect us to be here waiting when you come crawling back home, realizing you've made the biggest mistake of your life." I left for basic training 3 days later with only Mom and Emma at the bus station to see me off. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad had refused to come, claiming he had urgent work at the shop that couldn't wait. As the Greyhound bus pulled away from Cedar Falls, carrying me toward a future I couldn't yet imagine, I watched my hometown disappear in the rear window and wondered if I'd ever truly find my way back home. What I couldn't have known then, sitting in that uncomfortable bus seat with my small duffel bag and a heart full of equal parts excitement and terror, was that I was beginning a journey that would take me farther from home than I'd ever dreamed possible. I couldn't have imagined that the girl who learned to change oil filters in her father's garage would one day brief generals on military strategy, or that the skills he'd taught me would serve me well in places he'd never even heard of. Most importantly, I couldn't have foreseen that 20 years later, I'd be standing in front of him again, still trying to prove that the choice I'd made was worthy of his respect and that the daughter who'd left Cedar Falls to serve her country had become someone worthy of his pride. The road between that bus station and my father's retirement dinner would be filled with challenges, triumphs, and transformations that would test everything I thought I knew about duty, family, and finding your place in the world. But all of that was still ahead of me as I settled into my seat for the long ride to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, clutching the letter from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez that had started it all and trying not to think about the disappointment I'd seen in my father's eyes when I'd chosen my dreams over his expectations. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was like stepping into an alternate universe where everything I thought I knew about myself was systematically stripped away and rebuilt from the ground up. The drill sergeants didn't care that I could rebuild a transmission or that my father owned the most successful auto repair shop in Cedar Falls. Here, I was just another recruit learning to march in formation, memorize military protocols, and push my body beyond limits I didn't know existed. The first letter I wrote home was filled with excitement about the technical training I was receiving and the incredible machinery I was learning to maintain. I described the massive generators that powered entire base operations, the sophisticated diagnostic equipment that made Dad's shop tools look primitive, and the camaraderie I was building with fellow recruits from all over the country. I poured my heart into that letter, desperate to share my enthusiasm and prove to my family that I'd made the right choice. 2 weeks passed before I received a response, and when it finally came, it was a brief note from Mom filled with news about the weather and Emma's upcoming school play. Dad's name appeared only once, in a sentence mentioning that he was working late at the shop most nights. No acknowledgement of my training, no questions about my experiences, no indication that he cared about anything I was learning or achieving. The pattern continued throughout my 16 weeks of basic and advanced individual training. My letters home grew longer and more detailed as I tried to bridge the growing distance with descriptions of my progress, while the responses became shorter and more generic. It was as if my family was slowly erasing me from their daily lives, editing out the daughter who had chosen a different path. During advanced individual training for automotive maintenance, I excelled beyond even my own expectations. The skills Dad had taught me provided a solid foundation, but the military's approach to vehicle maintenance was more sophisticated and comprehensive than anything I'd experienced in Cedar Falls. I learned to work on everything from Humvees to helicopters, mastering diagnostic procedures that could identify problems in million-dollar equipment with precision that would have amazed my father. My instructors noticed my aptitude immediately. Staff Sergeant Williams, a career soldier with 23 years of experience, pulled me aside after a particularly challenging exercise where I'd successfully diagnosed a complex electrical problem that had stumped several other recruits. "Thompson, you've got real talent for this work," he said, reviewing my performance scores. "Have you ever thought about pursuing leadership training? The Army needs technical experts who can also teach and guide others." The suggestion planted a seed that would grow throughout my early military career. Leadership had never been something I'd considered back home, where my role was always as Dad's assistant rather than an independent decision-maker. But in the military environment, I found myself naturally gravitating toward helping other soldiers, sharing knowledge, and taking initiative in challenging situations. My first permanent duty assignment was to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I joined the 82nd Airborne Division as a wheeled vehicle mechanic. The transition from training environment to operational unit was jarring, but I threw myself into the work with determination that surprised even me. Within 6 months, I'd earned recognition as one of the most reliable mechanics in my unit, capable of handling complex repairs that others couldn't manage. The phone calls home became even more strained during this period. Dad would answer with polite but distant questions about whether I was eating enough and staying safe, but any attempt to discuss my work or achievements was met with obvious disinterest. When I mentioned that I was being considered for promotion, To specialist ahead of my peers, his response was a non-committal grunt followed by a quick transition to discussing Jake's computer programming projects. It was during my second year at Fort Bragg that I met Colonel Maria Rodriguez, the same woman who had visited my high school years earlier. She was now stationed at the base as a logistics officer, and our paths crossed when my unit was assigned to support a major training exercise she was coordinating. Recognizing my name from her records, she sought me out during a brief break in operations. "Thompson, right," she said, approaching me as I finished servicing a convoy of vehicles. "I remember you from Cedar Falls High School. You were the young woman interested in our technical programs." I straightened up, wiping grease from my hands with a rag that reminded me painfully of similar moments in Dad's garage. "Yes, ma'am. Your presentation changed my life." She studied me with the same warm but assessing gaze I remembered from that hallway conversation years earlier. "And how has that worked out for you?" For the next hour, as we walked through the motor pool and discussed my experiences, I found myself opening up about the challenges of military life and the growing rift with my family. Colonel Rodriguez listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences of choosing military service over family expectations. "The hardest part about this life," she said as our conversation wound down, "is that the people who love us most sometimes understand us least. They see the sacrifices but not the purpose, the distance but not the growth." Her words resonated deeply with my own struggles to maintain family connections across the widening gap of experience and understanding. "Do you think it gets easier?" I asked. "Not easier," she replied honestly, "but clearer. Eventually, you either find a way to bridge the gap, or you learn to live with it. The key is never stopping being the person you chose to become, regardless of whether others understand that choice." Over the following months, Colonel Rodriguez became an informal mentor, helping me navigate the complexities of military advancement while maintaining my technical expertise. When promotion opportunities arose, she encouraged me to pursue leadership positions that would broaden my skills beyond purely mechanical work. My promotion to sergeant came with assignment as a team leader responsible for training new recruits in vehicle maintenance procedures. The role required me to develop teaching abilities I'd never known I possessed, breaking down complex technical concepts into understandable steps and motivating soldiers who often arrived with no mechanical background whatsoever. One of my earliest students was Private Jennifer Walsh, a young woman from rural Montana who had joined the Army to escape an abusive home situation. She arrived at Fort Bragg with determination but zero mechanical knowledge, struggling to understand even basic concepts that had been second nature to me since childhood. "I don't think I'm cut out for this, Sergeant Thompson," she confided after a particularly frustrating day where she'd repeatedly failed to properly diagnose a relatively simple brake problem. "Maybe I should request a transfer to a different field." I saw something of my own uncertainty in her frustration, remembering my own fears about whether I belonged in the military despite my technical background. "Walsh, you're not here because this is supposed to be easy," I told her. "You're here because you chose to be, just like I did. The question isn't whether you're cut out for this, it's whether you're willing to work until you are." Over the following weeks, I spent extra hours working with Jennifer, breaking down each procedure into smaller steps and celebrating incremental progress. Watching her confidence grow as her skills developed reminded me why I'd chosen military service in the first place, and reinforced my growing sense that leadership might be as important to my future as technical expertise. The first real test of my leadership abilities came during my third year at Fort Bragg, when our unit was selected for deployment to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. The announcement sent a mixture of excitement and apprehension through our ranks, as many of us had trained for this possibility but never experienced actual combat operations. The night before deployment, I called home to let my family know I would be overseas for the next 15 months. The conversation was as awkward as I'd come to expect, with Mom asking worried questions about safety while Dad maintained his characteristic emotional distance. "Afghanistan," he repeated when I told him where I was headed. "I suppose they need mechanics there too." His tone suggested that my upcoming deployment was just another job assignment rather than a potentially dangerous mission in an active combat zone. The dismissal stung, but I'd grown accustomed to his refusal to acknowledge the significance of my military service. "Yes, Dad, they need mechanics," I replied, fighting to keep irritation out of my voice. "Someone has to keep the vehicles running that protect our soldiers and support our mission." "Well, just try to stay safe and come home in one piece," he said, his voice softening slightly. "Your mother worries about you." It was the closest thing to parental concern he'd expressed since I'd enlisted, and I held on to those words during the long flight overseas. Even if he couldn't understand or respect my choices, perhaps some part of him still cared about my well-being. Afghanistan was everything the training had prepared me for and nothing like I'd imagined. The heat was oppressive, the dust got into everything, and the constant threat of enemy attacks created a tension that never fully disappeared. Our forward operating base was a collection of prefabricated buildings, protective barriers, and motor pools where vehicles returned daily with damage ranging from routine wear to battle scars that told stories I didn't want to imagine. My responsibilities expanded beyond anything I'd experienced at Fort Bragg. As a sergeant in charge of a maintenance team, I was responsible not only for keeping our unit's vehicles operational but also for managing the emotional and professional development of soldiers facing combat stress for the first time. The technical challenges were significant, but the leadership demands were what truly tested my capabilities. 3 months into the deployment, our base came under direct attack during what should have been a routine maintenance period. Mortars and small arms fire erupted around us as enemy forces attempted to breach our perimeter defenses. While security personnel responded to the immediate threat, my team and I found ourselves responsible for protecting millions of dollars worth of vehicles and equipment while ensuring our own survival. The attack lasted 6 hours, during which I made decisions that would have been unthinkable in my previous life. I coordinated with security forces to establish defensive positions around critical equipment, directed my team in emergency procedures to prevent fuel and ammunition storage from becoming targets, and maintained communication with command personnel who needed real-time assessments of our operational capabilities. When the fighting finally ended, our commanding officer, Major Patricia Chen, sought me out in the motor pool where I was assessing damage and coordinating repair priorities. "Sergeant Thompson, I want to commend you and your team for your performance during today's attack," she said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. "Your leadership kept our vehicles secure and operational, which directly contributed to our successful defense." The recognition meant more to me than any praise I'd received for technical skills alone. For the first time since joining the military, I began to see myself not just as a skilled mechanic but as a leader capable of performing under pressure and making decisions that affected other people's lives. That night, I wrote a long letter home describing the attack and my team's response, hoping to convey some sense of the significance of what we'd accomplished. I described the tactical challenges we'd faced, the equipment we'd protected, and the commendation I'd received from Major Chen. For once, I felt like I had a story that might make my family understand why I'd chosen this path. The response, when it came 3 weeks later, was Mom's usual collection of family updates with a single line acknowledging my letter. "Glad to hear you're staying busy over there." No mention of the attack, the commendation, or anything suggesting they understood the gravity of what I described. The dismissal hurt worse than Dad's outright disapproval had. At least his anger suggested my choices mattered enough to provoke an emotional response. This polite disinterest felt like being erased, as if my experiences and achievements were too insignificant to warrant serious attention. I began to write fewer letters home, focusing instead on the relationships I was building with fellow soldiers who understood the challenges and rewards of military service. My team became my primary family, bound together by shared experiences that civilians could never fully comprehend. Jennifer Walsh, the private I'd trained back at Fort Bragg, had been assigned to my deployment unit and was now one of my most reliable mechanics. Her transformation from uncertain recruit to confident soldier validated my growing belief in the importance of military leadership and mentorship. "Sergeant Thompson," she said one evening as we finished maintaining a convoy of vehicles scheduled for a dangerous mission the following day, "I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me back at Bragg. I never would have made it this far without your training." Her words carried more weight than any family approval could have. This was tangible evidence that my choices had meaningful impact, that the path I'd chosen was creating value that extended beyond my own personal satisfaction. The remainder of our Afghanistan deployment was marked by increasingly complex missions and expanding responsibilities. Major Chen nominated me for the Army Commendation Medal based on my performance during the attack and my consistent leadership throughout our deployment. The award ceremony was conducted at our forward operating base, with my entire team present to witness the recognition. As Major Chen pinned the medal to my uniform, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with family approval or hometown recognition. This was acknowledgement from people who understood the challenges I'd faced and the standards I'd met, validation that my choice to pursue military service had been justified by achievement and contribution. When our deployment ended and we returned to Fort Bragg, I found myself fundamentally changed by the experience. The young woman who had left Cedar Falls to prove a point to her father had become a leader capable of functioning effectively under extreme pressure while developing other soldiers' capabilities. I was no longer just trying to justify my decision to join the military, I was building a career based on competence and commitment. The phone call home to announce my safe return was polite but distant, with family members expressing relief that I was back in a safe environment but little curiosity about what I'd accomplished overseas. Dad's comment that he was glad that's over suggested he viewed my deployment as an unfortunate interruption rather than a meaningful professional experience. Colonel Rodriguez, now promoted and stationed at the Pentagon, called to congratulate me on my successful deployment and discuss my future career options. "Thompson, you've demonstrated leadership potential that goes far beyond technical skills," she said during our conversation. "Have you considered pursuing a commission as an officer?" The suggestion represented a dramatic shift in how I thought about my military future. Officer training would require additional education and expanded responsibilities, but it would also open doors to leadership positions I'd never considered possible. More importantly, it would represent a definitive commitment to military service as a career rather than a temporary adventure. "I need to complete my bachelor's degree first," I replied, thinking about the education benefits that had originally attracted me to military service. "The Army has excellent programs for that," she assured me. "And based on your performance record, I think you'd be an excellent candidate for officer candidate school once you complete your education requirements." That conversation marked the beginning of a new phase in my military journey, one that would take me even further from the path my father had envisioned for me but closer to becoming the leader I was meant to be. The girl who had learned to change oil in a small-town garage was evolving into a woman capable of commanding soldiers and influencing military operations at the highest levels. As I hung up the phone after talking with Colonel Rodriguez, I realized that I was no longer trying to prove anything to my family back in Cedar Falls. I was building something entirely my own, something that would eventually demand their attention whether they wanted to give it or not. The question was no longer whether Dad would approve of my choices, but whether he would be capable of recognizing what I'd accomplished when the time came for that recognition to matter. The decision to pursue my bachelor's degree while serving active duty required a level of time management that would have seemed impossible during my days working in Dad's garage. Between my regular duties as a maintenance team leader and the additional responsibilities that came with my recent promotion to staff sergeant, finding time for coursework meant sacrificing sleep and social activities that other soldiers took for granted. I enrolled in the University of Maryland's distance learning program, choosing to major in logistics management with a minor in leadership studies. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was pursuing formal education in subjects I'd been learning through practical application for the past 5 years. Every evening after completing my military duties, I would retreat to my small apartment off base and transform into a student, writing papers about supply chain management while remembering the real-world logistics challenges I'd faced during deployment. The academic work proved more challenging than I'd anticipated, not because the material was difficult, but because translating my hands-on military experience into the theoretical frameworks required by university coursework demanded a different kind of thinking. Writing research papers about leadership theory felt abstract compared to the immediate reality of motivating exhausted soldiers to maintain vehicles in combat conditions, yet I began to see how formal education could enhance the intuitive skills I'd developed through experience. My professors, most of whom had never served in the military, were initially skeptical of my practical examples in classroom discussions. During one online seminar about crisis management, I described how our team had maintained operational vehicles during the mortar attack in Afghanistan, explaining the decision-making process and resource allocation strategies we'd employed under extreme pressure. Professor Williams, a civilian academic with extensive theoretical knowledge but no practical military experience, responded with polite interest that barely concealed his skepticism. "That's an interesting anecdote, Sarah, but I'm not sure how applicable those battlefield experiences are to civilian logistics management." His dismissal reminded me painfully of Dad's refusal to acknowledge the value of my military service, the assumption that what I was learning and accomplishing couldn't possibly be relevant to real-world situations. It took considerable self-control to respond professionally rather than pointing out that keeping soldiers alive and missions operational under enemy fire might actually be more challenging than managing corporate supply chains. The academic pursuit became another dividing line between my military life and my family connections. During our increasingly infrequent phone calls, Mom would ask about my classes with the same polite interest she showed in discussing the weather, while Dad's response to news of my educational progress was typically a grunt followed by updates about Jake's latest computer programming project or Emma's teaching career. Emma had graduated from the University of Northern Iowa with a degree in elementary education and was now teaching 4th grade at Cedar Falls Elementary, the same school where she'd volunteered during high school. Her engagement to David Chen, a local accountant whose family had moved to Cedar Falls when he was in middle school, was announced during one of my rare phone calls home. "The wedding is planned for next June," Mom explained, her voice filled with the excitement that had been notably absent when discussing my military achievements. "Emma wants you to be in the wedding party, of course, but we weren't sure about your availability." The assumption that my military service would prevent me from attending my sister's wedding stung more than any outright criticism could have. "I'll make sure to get leave approved," I assured her, though the conversation left me wondering whether my presence would be welcomed or merely tolerated. Jake had parlayed his computer skills into a position with a tech startup in Des Moines, though he still lived at home and helped Dad with the garage's increasingly sophisticated diagnostic equipment. His success in bridging technology with automotive repair had earned Dad's grudging respect for innovation, something my own technological expertise in military equipment maintenance had never achieved. The contrast in how my siblings' career choices were received versus my own was becoming impossible to ignore. Emma's teaching career was celebrated as noble service to the community, while Jake's technical work was praised as smart innovation. My military service, which combined elements of both teaching and technical innovation, was treated as an unfortunate phase that everyone hoped I would eventually outgrow. Completing my bachelor's degree while maintaining my military duties took 3 years of disciplined effort that left little time for anything beyond work and study. The day I received my diploma in the mail, rather than walking across a stage with traditional ceremony, felt like a milestone that should have meant more than it did. There was no family celebration, no proud phone calls, just a brief acknowledgement from Mom that she was glad I'd finished my education. Colonel Rodriguez, now serving as a deputy director in the Army's Logistics Command, called to congratulate me on completing my degree and discuss the next phase of my career development. "Thompson, your academic achievement combined with your operational experience makes you an ideal candidate for officer candidate school," she said during our conversation. "The Army needs officers who understand both the theoretical and practical aspects of leadership." The prospect of becoming a commissioned officer represented everything I'd been working toward since that first conversation in my high school hallway, yet it also meant making an even deeper commitment to a military career that my family viewed as a temporary detour. Accepting a commission would require at least 8 more years of service, pushing my total military commitment well beyond anything Dad could dismiss as a youthful adventure. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" I asked, already knowing that the answer would create another opportunity for family disappointment. "OCS starts classes 4 times a year," she replied. "If you apply now, you could potentially start in the fall session. That would put you on track for commissioning next spring, just about the time your sister gets married." The timing seemed designed to create maximum family conflict, forcing me to choose between another career milestone and a family celebration. Yet I knew that delaying officer training to accommodate a wedding would be exactly the kind of prioritizing that reinforced my family's belief that my military service wasn't serious enough to warrant their respect. "I'll submit my application," I decided, knowing that the choice would create another rift in family relations that were already strained beyond easy repair. Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia, was a 16-week intensive program designed to transform experienced enlisted soldiers into commissioned officers capable of leading at increasingly complex levels. The academic requirements were rigorous, covering everything from military law and ethics to advanced tactical operations and personnel management. Physical standards were demanding, but the mental challenges were what truly tested candidates' suitability for officer responsibilities. Unlike my earlier military training, OCS brought together candidates from diverse backgrounds and experience levels, creating an environment where my technical expertise and deployment experience gave me advantages over some classmates while highlighting areas where others excelled beyond my capabilities. Learning to lead peers rather than subordinates required developing new approaches to motivation and decision-making. My tactical group included Maria Santos, a former military police officer from Texas with extensive experience in criminal investigations, and Robert Kim, a supply specialist from California who had managed logistics operations across multiple deployments. Our diverse skill sets complemented each other during group exercises, but we each struggled with different aspects of the officer development process. The leadership challenges were designed to test our ability to make decisions under pressure while considering factors beyond immediate tactical concerns. During one exercise, I was tasked with leading a simulated convoy operation where equipment failures threatened mission success while personnel injuries required medical evacuation priorities. The scenario forced me to balance competing demands while maintaining unit cohesion and mission focus. Drawing on my deployment experience and technical background, I developed a solution that addressed both immediate tactical needs and longer-term operational requirements. My performance earned recognition from the instructor staff, but more importantly, it demonstrated that my years of practical experience had prepared me for the complex decision-making that officer responsibilities would require. The academic coursework proved equally challenging, requiring mastery of military doctrine and leadership theory that built upon but extended far beyond my practical experience. Writing detailed operation orders and conducting formal briefings demanded communication skills I'd never needed as an enlisted soldier, forcing me to articulate strategic thinking in ways that could be understood and implemented by others. One of the most difficult assignments required developing a comprehensive training program for newly assigned personnel in a hypothetical unit with diverse skill levels and experience backgrounds. The project drew heavily on my experience training soldiers like Jennifer Walsh, but demanded a systematic approach that could be replicated and measured for effectiveness. Working late into the night in the OCS library, surrounded by leadership manuals and case studies of successful military operations, I found myself thinking about the distance between my current reality and the expectations that had shaped my childhood in Cedar Falls. The girl who had learned to change oil filters was now studying strategic planning and organizational development, preparing to lead soldiers in operations that could affect national security interests. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was becoming exactly the kind of leader Dad had always claimed to value, someone capable of making difficult decisions and managing complex operations under pressure. Yet because my leadership development was happening within a military context he couldn't understand or appreciate, these achievements remained invisible to the family whose approval I'd once desperately sought. Graduation from officer candidate school was scheduled for the same weekend as Emma's wedding, creating the choice I'd anticipated since beginning the program. The commissioning ceremony represented the culmination of nearly a decade of military service and education, the moment when I would officially become a second lieutenant in the United States Army. Emma's wedding represented my last realistic opportunity to participate in a major family celebration before my military obligations made such participation increasingly difficult. The decision was made easier by a phone call from Mom 3 weeks before graduation. "Sarah, we need to know if you're coming to the wedding," she said without preamble. "Emma needs to finalize the arrangements, and she's been putting off ordering your bridesmaid dress because we weren't sure about your availability." The tone suggested that my attendance was expected to be problematic rather than welcomed, that my military commitments were an inconvenience to be worked around rather than achievements to be respected. "I have my commissioning ceremony that weekend," I explained. "It's the culmination of 16 weeks of intensive training." "Well, family should come first," Mom replied, the disappointment evident in her voice. "Emma's only getting married once." The implication that my military milestones were less important than family events, that I should be willing to sacrifice professional achievements for social obligations, crystallized everything that had been building between us for nearly a decade. "And I'm only getting commissioned once," I responded, my voice sharper than I'd intended. The conversation ended with hurt feelings on both sides and no resolution to the scheduling conflict. That evening, I called Emma directly, hoping to explain my situation and explore alternatives that might allow me to participate in her special day without sacrificing my own professional milestone. "Sarah, I understand that your military thing is important to you," Emma said, her voice carrying the same polite distance that had characterized most family communications about my service. "But this is my wedding. Can't you just skip the ceremony and come home for the weekend?" Her casual dismissal of my commissioning as "your military thing" revealed how little my family understood about what I'd been working toward. The ceremony wasn't just a formality to be skipped, it was recognition of a transformation that had required years of dedication and sacrifice. Missing it would be like asking Emma to skip her own graduation because someone else had a birthday party. "Emma, this isn't just a ceremony," I tried to explain. "It's the moment I become an officer. It's what I've been working toward for almost 10 years. And this is what I've been planning for 2 years," she replied. I thought family was supposed to be more important than work. The conversation revealed a fundamental misunderstanding that had been growing throughout my military career. My family viewed my service as a job that could be set aside when convenient, rather than a calling that shaped every aspect of my identity and future. They couldn't comprehend that choosing military service meant accepting obligations that sometimes conflicted with family preferences. In the end, I chose to attend my commissioning ceremony, sending Emma a heartfelt letter explaining my decision and a generous wedding gift that I hoped would convey my love and support despite my absence. The day I was commissioned as Second Lieutenant Sarah Thompson, standing in formation with my OCS classmates as we took the oath of office, was one of the proudest moments of my life. Yet it was overshadowed by the knowledge that my family was celebrating Emma's wedding without me. probably discussing my absence as another example of how military service had changed me for the worse. My first assignment as a newly commissioned officer was to the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, where I was assigned as a maintenance platoon leader responsible for 37 soldiers and millions of dollars worth of equipment. The transition from enlisted leadership to officer responsibilities was more challenging than I'd anticipated, requiring me to think strategically about operations while maintaining the technical expertise that had defined my earlier career. Leading a platoon meant being responsible not just for equipment maintenance but for the professional development, personal welfare, and combat readiness of soldiers whose lives and careers depended on my decision-making ability. The weight of that responsibility was both exhilarating and terrifying, especially during my first few months when every decision felt like a test of whether I deserved the lieutenant's bars on my uniform. My platoon sergeant, Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, was a 20-year veteran with extensive deployment experience who could have easily resented being assigned to work with a newly commissioned officer with limited command experience. Instead, she became an invaluable mentor who helped me navigate the complex transition from technical expert to operational leader. "Lieutenant Thompson," she said during one of our early planning sessions, "you've got the technical knowledge and the deployment experience that some new officers lack. Now you need to learn how to use those assets to develop your soldiers rather than just completing missions." Her guidance proved essential as I learned to balance competing demands for equipment readiness, training requirements, and personnel management. Leading soldiers required understanding not just how to maintain vehicles but how to motivate people, resolve conflicts, and make decisions that affected multiple levels of the organization simultaneously. The first major test of my leadership came 6 months into my assignment, when our division was tasked with supporting a large-scale training exercise that would test our readiness for potential deployment. My platoon was responsible for maintaining vehicles for an entire brigade, ensuring that complex operations could continue without interruption due to equipment failures. The exercise scenario simulated combat operations in a desert environment, with extended periods of intensive vehicle use under challenging conditions. Equipment failures were not just training inconveniences but could result in mission failure and negative evaluations that would affect our unit's deployment readiness status. 3 days into the exercise, a critical component failure in one of our main battle tanks threatened to compromise an entire company's operational capability. The replacement part was not available through normal supply channels, and waiting for standard procurement would mean mission failure. Drawing on my technical background and knowledge of similar equipment configurations, I developed an improvised solution using components from other vehicles that restored operational capability without compromising safety standards. The successful repair earned recognition from our brigade commander, Colonel Thomas Anderson, who commended my technical innovation and leadership under pressure. More importantly, it demonstrated to my soldiers that their new platoon leader could solve problems and make decisions that kept their unit mission capable. Lieutenant Thompson, Master Sergeant Williams said after the exercise concluded, "You're learning that being an officer isn't about having all the answers. It's about finding solutions when there aren't obvious answers." Her observation captured something important about the evolution of my military identity. The technical skills Dad had taught me in his garage provided a foundation, but military leadership required developing capabilities that went far beyond mechanical expertise. I was becoming someone who could think strategically, lead effectively, and adapt to challenges that had no predetermined solutions. The success of our training exercise led to selection for deployment to Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom, where my platoon would be responsible for maintaining equipment for combat operations in an active theater. The deployment notification arrived just 2 weeks before Dad's 60th birthday, creating another opportunity for family conflict over military obligations versus personal relationships. During the phone call to inform my family about the upcoming deployment, Dad's response was predictably dismissive. "More playing soldier in the sandbox," he commented, his tone suggesting that my second combat deployment was no more significant than my first had been. "Dad, this isn't playing," I replied, frustration breaking through my usual diplomatic approach. "I'm leading soldiers in combat operations. People's lives depend on the decisions I make." "People's lives depend on the decisions I make too," he shot back. "Every time someone's brakes fail or their transmission goes out, they're trusting that I did my job right. The difference is I'm protecting people in my own community instead of getting involved in foreign wars that don't affect us." The comparison between automotive repair and military leadership revealed how little he understood about the scope and complexity of my responsibilities. While I respected the importance of his work and the service he provided to our community, the equivalency he drew demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what military service actually entailed. That conversation was our last substantial discussion before my deployment to Iraq, leaving unresolved tensions that would continue to fester during the 15 months I spent overseas. The deployment itself was more complex and dangerous than my previous Afghanistan experience, with my platoon supporting operations across multiple forward operating bases while managing equipment maintenance challenges that tested every aspect of my leadership development. Leading soldiers in combat operations while managing family relationships across an ocean of distance and misunderstanding became a defining challenge of my military career. Every successful mission, every commendation, every promotion felt hollow when shared with people who couldn't understand their significance. Yet I was becoming someone I'd never imagined possible during those early days in Dad's garage, someone whose expertise and leadership were making meaningful contributions to operations that mattered on a global scale. The woman who returned from Iraq was fundamentally different from the newly commissioned lieutenant who had deployed, seasoned by experience that had tested every aspect of her character and capabilities. I had successfully led soldiers through complex operations, managed resources worth millions of dollars, and made decisions under pressure that had direct consequences for mission success and personnel safety. Yet none of these achievements seemed to matter to the family whose approval I'd once desperately sought. Returning from Iraq as a seasoned combat veteran and platoon leader opened doors to opportunities I'd never imagined during my early military career. My performance evaluations consistently ranked me in the top 5% of officers at my level, and my combination of technical expertise and proven leadership under fire made me an attractive candidate for advanced military education and staff positions. Colonel Rodriguez, now serving as a senior logistics officer at the Pentagon, called me shortly after my return to discuss my career trajectory and potential assignments. "Sarah, you've demonstrated exceptional capability at every level of responsibility," she said during our conversation. "It's time to start thinking about positions that will prepare you for senior leadership roles." The Army's Intermediate Staff College at Fort Leavenworth represented the next crucial step in my professional development, a year-long program designed to prepare mid-level officers for command and staff positions at increasingly strategic levels. The coursework would cover everything from joint operations planning to international relations, providing the broad educational foundation necessary for officers who might eventually shape military policy at the highest levels. Acceptance into the Command and General Staff College was highly competitive, with selection based on performance records, educational achievements, and potential for continued advancement. My application included letters of recommendation from every commander I'd served under, each emphasizing different aspects of my leadership development and operational contributions. The acceptance notification arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was conducting vehicle inspections with my platoon. Master Sergeant Williams handed me the official envelope with a knowing smile, having recognized the distinctive letterhead of the Army's Educational Command. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Thompson," she said as I read the acceptance letter. "Fort Leavenworth is going to be lucky to have you." The news should have been cause for celebration, another milestone in a military career that was exceeding my most optimistic expectations. Instead, I found myself thinking about how to explain this achievement to a family that had never understood or appreciated any of my previous accomplishments. The phone call home that evening followed the familiar pattern of polite disinterest masked as supportive conversation. Mom expressed pride in my selection for advanced education, though her questions revealed little understanding of what the program actually entailed or what it meant for my career prospects. Dad's contribution to the conversation was limited to asking how long I'd be away and whether this meant I'd finally be done with military service. "It's a year-long program, Dad," I explained. "And no, it's actually preparing me for more advanced positions within the Army." His silence spoke volumes about his continued hope that I would eventually abandon military service and return to Cedar Falls to take over the garage. The gap between his expectations and my reality had grown so wide that meaningful communication seemed impossible. Jake had married his college girlfriend and was now working as a software engineer for a major technology company, while Emma and David had settled into domestic life with the recent addition of their first child, a daughter they'd named Grace. The family gatherings I missed increasingly centered around grandchildren and suburban achievements that felt completely disconnected from my military experiences. During one of our infrequent phone conversations, Emma mentioned that Dad had been talking about retirement and succession planning for Thompson's auto repair. "He's been hoping you might consider coming home when your military commitment is finished," she said carefully. "He's getting older, and Jake has no interest in the automotive business." The suggestion that I might abandon a successful military career to return to small-town automotive repair revealed how little my family understood about the person I'd become, the skills I'd developed managing complex military operations, and Leading soldiers in combat couldn't simply be transferred to changing oil and replacing brake pads, nor would I want to make such a transition. Emma, I'm not planning to leave the military, I replied, trying to keep frustration out of my voice. This is my career, not a temporary adventure. But what about family, she asked, echoing arguments I'd been hearing for over a decade. Don't you want to come home eventually and be part of our lives? The question revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what home meant to me now. My home was wherever the Army assigned me, surrounded by fellow soldiers who understood my commitments and shared my values. Cedar Falls had become a place I visited rather than a place I belonged. The year at Fort Leavenworth was intellectually demanding in ways that challenged every assumption I'd developed about military service and leadership. The curriculum covered strategic planning, international relations, joint operations coordination, and advanced leadership theory that required thinking about military problems at levels far beyond tactical operations. My classmates included officers from every branch of service, many with advanced degrees and diverse operational experiences that enriched classroom discussions and group projects. Working alongside Air Force pilots, Navy submarine commanders, and Marine infantry officers broadened my understanding of how different military specialties contributed to overall national defense strategies. The capstone project required developing a comprehensive strategic plan for a hypothetical military operation involving multiple service branches and international coalition partners. My team was tasked with planning humanitarian assistance operations in a fictional crisis scenario that combined natural disaster response with complex political considerations. Drawing on my logistics background and operational experience, I developed the transportation and supply chain components of our plan while coordinating with team members responsible for communications, security, and diplomatic considerations. The project demanded thinking about military operations as part of broader national policy objectives rather than isolated tactical missions. Our presentation to a panel of senior officers and civilian defense officials earned recognition as one of the most comprehensive and realistic plans submitted by any student team. More importantly, the experience demonstrated my capability to think strategically about complex problems that required coordinating multiple organizations and considering long-term political implications. Colonel James Mitchell, the program director, called me into his office after the final presentations to discuss my performance and future career possibilities. Lieutenant Thompson, your work this year has been consistently outstanding, he said, reviewing my academic records. You should seriously consider applying for positions that will prepare you for senior command responsibilities. The suggestion planted seeds for thinking about military leadership at levels I'd never previously considered. Senior command positions meant responsibility for thousands of soldiers and operations that could affect national security interests, but they also meant deepening my commitment to military service in ways that would make civilian career transitions increasingly unlikely. My next assignment was to the Pentagon as a staff officer in the Logistics Directorate, working on strategic planning for military supply chain operations across multiple geographic regions. The position required security clearances and involved analyzing classified information about military capabilities and operational requirements that affected global security considerations. Working in the Pentagon was simultaneously exhilarating and overwhelming, surrounded by senior officers and civilian officials who shaped military policy at the highest levels. My technical background and operational experience provided valuable perspectives on practical implementation of strategic decisions, while my recent education had prepared me to think about broader policy implications. The pace of work was intense, with analyses and briefings required for senior leadership decisions that could affect military operations worldwide. My typical day involved reviewing intelligence reports, coordinating with other service branches on joint logistics requirements, and preparing materials for briefings to general officers and civilian defense officials. 6 months into my Pentagon assignment, I was selected for promotion to major, a milestone that represented entry into the ranks of senior military officers. The promotion ceremony was conducted in a Pentagon conference room with my immediate supervisor and colleagues present, but no family members who could understand the significance of the achievement. The phone call home to announce my promotion was met with the usual polite congratulations that revealed little genuine understanding or enthusiasm. Dad's response was particularly deflating. Well, I suppose that's good for your military career. But when are you planning to use all this leadership experience in the real world? His implication that military service wasn't part of the real world captured everything that had been wrong with our relationship since I'd first enlisted. Despite leading soldiers in combat, managing complex operations under extreme pressure, and now contributing to national security decisions at the Pentagon, he still viewed my achievements as somehow less substantial than civilian accomplishments. The disconnect became even more apparent during my rare visits home, where conversations about my work were quickly redirected to updates about local happenings and family developments that seemed trivial compared to the strategic challenges I face daily. My experiences briefing general officers about logistics requirements for potential military operations couldn't be shared with family members who lacked security clearances, creating another barrier to meaningful communication. Jake's success in the technology sector had earned Dad's admiration in ways my military achievements never had, perhaps because software development was something he could understand and appreciate even if he couldn't perform it himself. Emma's dedication to teaching was consistently praised as valuable community service, while my military service was treated as an unfortunate career choice that prevented me from contributing to family and community life. During one particularly frustrating family dinner, Dad made his feelings explicit. "Sarah, you've got all this education and leadership experience now. When are you going to come home and put it to use building something that matters?" The suggestion that my military service didn't matter, that protecting national security interests was less valuable than managing a small-town automotive repair business, crystallized the fundamental misunderstanding that had poisoned our relationship for over 15 years. "Dad, I am building something that matters," I replied, my voice harder than I'd intended. "I'm serving my country and protecting the freedoms that allow you to run your business in peace." "Don't lecture me about freedom, Sarah," he shot back, his face reddening with anger. "I've been contributing to this community for 30 years. While you've been off playing soldier in foreign countries that don't affect us." The argument that followed was our most heated exchange since the night I'd announced my decision to enlist, with years of accumulated frustration and misunderstanding erupting into accusations and hurt feelings that left lasting damage to our already strained relationship. I left Cedar Falls that weekend knowing that the gap between us had become too wide to bridge through normal family interactions. My career trajectory continued upward with assignment to command a logistics battalion, a position that made me responsible for over 800 soldiers and supply operations that supported an entire division. The command was based at Fort Hood, Texas, where I would spend the next 3 years learning to lead at levels that required thinking about personnel management, operational planning, and strategic coordination simultaneously. Battalion command was the culmination of everything I'd been working toward since my commissioning, the position where technical expertise, leadership development, and strategic education combined into comprehensive military leadership responsibility. My soldiers included mechanics, supply specialists, transportation experts, and administrative personnel whose diverse skills had to be coordinated to support complex military operations. The first major test of my command abilities came during a large-scale training exercise that simulated multi-corps operations across several states. My battalion was responsible for maintaining supply lines and equipment readiness for forces that included active duty, National Guard, and reserve components with different training levels and equipment standards. The exercise scenario included simulated enemy attacks on supply convoys, equipment failures under extreme conditions, and coordination challenges that tested every aspect of our operational capabilities. Success required not just technical competence but strategic thinking about resource allocation, risk management, and contingency planning that could adapt to changing conditions. My battalion's performance during the exercise earned commendation from the division commander and recognition as the most effective logistics unit participating in the multi-service training. More importantly, the experience demonstrated my capability to command at levels that affected large-scale military operations and strategic objectives. The success led to selection for promotion to lieutenant colonel and assignment to the Army War College, the most prestigious educational opportunity available to senior military officers. The War College program was designed to prepare officers for the highest levels of military leadership, covering strategic planning, national security, policy, and joint operations coordination that could affect international relations. The year at Carlisle Barracks was intellectually demanding in ways that pushed my understanding of military service beyond operational concerns to broader questions of national policy and international security. My classmates included officers being prepared for general officer responsibilities, with many destined for positions that would shape military policy at the Pentagon and overseas commands. The curriculum required analyzing complex geopolitical situations, developing strategic responses to national security challenges, and understanding how military capabilities supported diplomatic and economic objectives. My final research project examined logistics requirements for humanitarian assistance operations in failed states, combining my technical background with strategic analysis of international intervention policies. Graduation from the War College marked my entry into the ranks of senior officers being considered for general officer promotion and positions that would affect military policy at the highest levels. My performance throughout the program had been exceptional, earning recognition from faculty members and classmates who represented the future leadership of American military forces. The assignment that followed was as Deputy Commander of a Logistics Command responsible for supply operations across the Pacific region, a position that required coordinating with Allied military forces and managing supply chains that affected American military capabilities across multiple countries. The job demanded strategic thinking about resource allocation, international cooperation, and contingency planning for potential conflicts that could affect global security. 3 years in that position led to promotion to colonel and assignment as commander of the Army's primary logistics school, responsible for training officers and enlisted personnel in supply chain management, maintenance operations, and strategic logistics planning. The command included oversight of curriculum development, faculty management, and coordination with other service branches on joint logistics education. Leading the institution that had once trained me represented a full-circle moment in my military career, demonstrating how far I'd progressed from the young woman who had learned basic automotive maintenance in her father's garage. The position required thinking about military education as a strategic asset that affected the Army's long-term capabilities and effectiveness. My tenure as school commander was marked by significant curriculum reforms that integrated new technologies and strategic concepts into logistics training programs. The changes earned recognition from senior Army leadership and resulted in my selection for promotion to Brigadier General, making me one of the youngest women to achieve General Officer rank in Army logistics. The promotion ceremony was conducted at the Pentagon with senior officials and colleagues present, but no family members who could appreciate the significance of achieving General Officer status. The phone call home to announce my promotion was met with the same polite congratulations that had characterized family responses to every previous achievement. Dad's reaction was particularly telling. "That's nice, Sarah. Are you the boss of everyone now?" His inability to understand that becoming a general officer represented recognition of exceptional leadership and strategic capability, rather than simply climbing a bureaucratic ladder, captured everything that remained wrong with our relationship. The gap between his perception of my career and the reality of my achievements had become so wide that meaningful communication seemed impossible. My first assignment as a general officer was as Assistant Division Commander for a major Army installation, responsible for training readiness, personnel management, and operational planning that affected tens of thousands of soldiers. The position required balancing competing demands for resources, personnel, and training time while maintaining readiness standards that could affect national defense capabilities. The role also involved frequent interaction with civilian officials, congressional representatives, and international military leaders who visited the installation for briefings on Army capabilities and training programs. My technical background and operational experience provided credibility in discussions about military readiness and strategic planning that influenced policy decisions at the highest levels. 2 years in that position led to selection for promotion to Major General and assignment as Commander of the Army's Logistics Command for the entire Western United States, responsible for supply operations that affected multiple installations and operational commands. The position represented the culmination of nearly 25 years of military service and demonstrated trust in my capability to manage strategic operations that affected national defense. The command included oversight of supply chains, maintenance, operations, transportation networks, and personnel training that supported Army operations across multiple states and international locations. Success required coordinating with other service branches, civilian contractors, and international partners while managing resources worth billions of dollars. Meanwhile, Dad had announced his intention to retire from Thompson's Auto Repair, creating family discussions about succession planning that increasingly focused on my potential return to Cedar Falls. The suggestions became more frequent and explicit during family phone calls, with Mom and Emma advocating for me to consider leaving military service to take over the family business. "Sarah, you've accomplished so much in the military," Mom said during one conversation. "Don't you think it's time to come home and use all that leadership experience to help your father's business?" The implication that managing a small-town automotive repair shop would be a natural progression from commanding strategic military operations revealed how little my family understood about the scope and complexity of my responsibilities. The suggestion that I should abandon a successful military career at its peak to return to Cedar Falls demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of who I'd become and what I'd achieved. "Mom, I'm commanding operations that affect national security," I replied, trying to convey the magnitude of my current responsibilities. I can't just walk away from that to change oil and replace brake pads. But it's family, Sarah, she responded, using the argument that had been deployed against my military service for over 2 decades. Don't you think family should come first? The conversation revealed that nothing had changed in my family's attitude toward my military service, despite 25 years of achievements that would have been celebrated if they'd occurred in any civilian context. My promotion to Major General, command of strategic operations, and recognition as a senior leader in national defense were still viewed as less important than local business concerns. The disconnect reached its peak during Dad's retirement planning, when he announced that the celebration would be held at the VFW Hall with the entire community invited to honor his 35 years of service to Cedar Falls. The invitation included a request that I attend in uniform, not to honor my own service but to represent the military community's appreciation for his civilian contributions. Everyone's excited to see you, Sarah, Emma said when discussing the retirement dinner plans. Dad's really proud to have a general in the family, even if he doesn't always show it. The suggestion that Dad was proud of my achievements contradicted every interaction we'd had about my military service, but I agreed to attend the retirement dinner with cautious optimism that perhaps our relationship could be repaired through public recognition of mutual respect and appreciation. The retirement dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening in March, with over 200 community members expected to attend. Dad had specifically requested that I deliver remarks honoring his service to the community, creating an opportunity for public reconciliation that might bridge the gap that had divided us for so many years. I flew into Cedar Falls the morning of the dinner, staying at a local hotel rather than with family to avoid potential conflicts that might affect the evening's celebration. The VFW Hall was decorated with photographs from Dad's career, displays of awards and recognition from community organizations, and testimonials from customers whose vehicles he'd repaired over the decades. The dinner itself was a testament to Dad's reputation and community standing, with speakers praising his integrity, technical expertise, and dedication to serving others. Local officials, business leaders, and longtime customers shared stories about his contributions to Cedar Falls and the positive impact his work had made on their lives. When the time came for my remarks, I approached the podium with carefully prepared comments that honored Dad's service while drawing parallels between his dedication to community and my own commitment to national service. I spoke about the values he'd taught me through his example, the work ethic I'd learned in his garage, and the leadership principles that had guided both of our careers. The audience responded positively to my remarks, with applause and nodding heads suggesting that my comments had struck the right tone for the occasion. I concluded by presenting Dad with a commemoration plaque recognizing his service to the community and sat down feeling optimistic that we'd finally found common ground for mutual respect and appreciation. Dad's response, when he took the podium for his own remarks, destroyed any hope for reconciliation in a way that was more devastating than any private argument could have been. I want to thank everyone who's contributed to this celebration, he began, his voice carrying easily through the crowded hall. 35 years of serving this community has been the most rewarding work of my life. He spoke about the satisfaction of solving mechanical problems, the relationships he'd built with customers, and the pride he felt in contributing to his neighbors' daily lives. Then his tone shifted as he addressed my military service directly. Some people choose to serve far from home, fighting battles that don't affect us here in Cedar Falls, he said, his eyes finding mine across the crowded room. 20 years. My daughter has wasted playing soldier when she could have built something real here at home with the people who love her. The silence that followed was deafening, with 200 guests turning to stare at me as the weight of his public rejection settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. The humiliation was complete and deliberate, designed to demonstrate that despite my achievements and recognition, he still viewed my life's work as a waste of time and opportunity. I sat frozen in my chair, the dress blue uniform that represented 25 years of service and sacrifice suddenly feeling like a costume rather than a symbol of achievement. The medals on my chest, earned through leadership under fire and recognition from the highest levels of military command, seemed meaningless in the face of Dad's public dismissal. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of awkward conversations and sympathetic glances from community members who had witnessed my public humiliation. I left the VFW hall that night knowing that the relationship with my father was damaged beyond repair, that no amount of achievement or recognition would ever earn his respect or approval. The drive back to my hotel was filled with anger, hurt, and a profound sense of loss that went beyond personal disappointment to encompass grief for the family relationships that would never be healed. I'd spent 25 years trying to prove myself worthy of respect and recognition that would never come, pursuing achievements that would never matter to the people whose approval I'd once desperately sought. That night, I called Colonel Rodriguez. now retired but still a trusted mentor and friend, to process what had happened and consider my options for responding to such a public rejection. "Sarah, some people will never understand what we do or why it matters," she said after I described the evening's events. "The question isn't whether your father approves of your choices, but whether you're proud of who you've become and what you've accomplished." Her words provided perspective that helped me focus on the reality of my achievements rather than the pain of family rejection. I had become a leader whose decisions affected national security, whose expertise was valued at the highest levels of military command, whose service had protected the freedoms that allowed small-town automotive repair shops to operate in peace and security. The next morning brought a phone call that would change everything and provide the vindication I'd never expected to receive. The caller identification showed a Pentagon number I recognized as belonging to the Secretary of Defense's office, though I couldn't imagine why such a senior official would be calling me directly. "General Thompson, this is Secretary Harrison," the voice said when I answered. "I have some news that I wanted to share with you personally before it becomes public knowledge." The Secretary of Defense explained that I had been nominated for appointment to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military position available to officers in my career field. The nomination represented recognition of my strategic expertise, leadership capabilities, and potential to contribute to national security decisions at the highest levels of government. "General Thompson, this nomination is based on your exceptional record of service and your demonstrated capability to lead at the strategic level," Secretary Harrison continued. "The President specifically requested that your name be included in the candidate pool based on recommendations from senior military leadership. The nomination would require Senate confirmation and public announcement, meaning that my selection for the most prestigious military position available would become national news." The irony was almost overwhelming. Less than 18 hours after my father had publicly dismissed my military service as wasted time, I would be recognized at the highest levels of government for exceptional achievement and strategic leadership. "Sir, I'm honored by the nomination and grateful for the confidence you've shown in my abilities," I managed to respond, though my mind was reeling from the magnitude of what had just occurred. "The announcement will be made this afternoon, Secretary," Harrison concluded. "Congratulations, General Thompson. Your country is proud of your service." As I hung up the phone, I realized that the vindication I'd never expected to receive was about to become public knowledge in ways that would make Dad's dismissal of my service look not just wrong but absurd. The woman he'd accused of wasting 20 years playing soldier was about to be nominated for the highest military position in her field, recognition that would be covered by national media and celebrated by military communities worldwide. The official announcement came that afternoon through a Pentagon press release that identified me as one of 3 candidates being considered for the Joint Chiefs position. Within hours, the news had been picked up by national media outlets, with reporters seeking background information about my career and achievements. My phone began ringing with calls from military colleagues, former classmates, and soldiers I'd served with throughout my career, all offering congratulations and expressing pride in my nomination. The outpouring of support and recognition from people who understood the significance of the achievement provided a stark contrast to the family relationships that had been characterized by indifference and dismissal. The media coverage included interviews with soldiers I'd commanded, descriptions of my operational achievements, and analysis of my qualifications for senior strategic leadership. Reading about my career through the lens of national recognition, I realized how much I'd accomplished despite the lack of family support and encouragement. The call from Mom came that evening, her voice filled with excitement and confusion as she tried to process what she'd learned from news reports about my nomination. "Sarah, we saw you on television," she said, her words rushing together in barely controlled excitement. "They're saying you might be chosen for the most important military position in the country." "Yes, Mom, I've been nominated for the Joint Chiefs of Staff," I confirmed, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the satisfaction I felt at finally having achievements that even my family couldn't dismiss or ignore. "But how did this happen?" she asked, revealing how little she'd understood about my career trajectory despite 25 years of military service. "We thought you were just working in an office somewhere." The conversation revealed that my family had never comprehended the scope or significance of my responsibilities, viewing my military service as generic government employment rather than strategic leadership that affected national security. Their shock at my nomination demonstrated how completely they'd misunderstood everything I'd been working toward and achieving. Jake called later that evening, his voice filled with genuine admiration and perhaps some embarrassment about the family's treatment of my military career. "Sarah, I had no idea you were such a big deal in the military," he admitted. "The news reports make it sound like you're incredibly important." "I've been trying to tell you that for 25 years, I replied, though without the bitterness. I might have felt before achieving this level of recognition. Emma's call was more emotional, with tears evident in her voice as she tried to apologize for the family's failure to appreciate my achievements. "Sarah, we never understood what you were doing or how important it was," she said. "Watching the news coverage, we realize how wrong we've been about everything." The conversation with Dad, when it finally came, was brief and awkward, with long silences punctuating his attempts to process the contradiction between his dismissal of my service and the national recognition I was receiving. "Sarah, I saw the news about your nomination," he said finally. "I guess I never understood what you were really doing in the military." His admission fell far short of the apology I might have wanted, but it represented acknowledgement that his assessment of my career had been fundamentally wrong. The man who had publicly declared that I'd wasted 20 years playing soldier was being forced to confront evidence that those same 20 years had prepared me for recognition at the highest levels of national leadership. "Dad, I've been trying to explain what I was doing for 25 years, I replied. "The only thing that's changed is that now other people are explaining it for me." The Senate confirmation process that followed was extensive and thorough, with hearings that examined every aspect of my qualifications and fitness for the position. The testimony from military colleagues, operational commanders, and policy experts painted a comprehensive picture of my capabilities and achievements that validated the nomination decision. The confirmation hearing itself was conducted before a packed Senate chamber with national media coverage that brought my story to audiences far beyond military communities. Senators from both parties praised my qualifications and service record, with several specifically noting that my nomination represented recognition of women's contributions to military leadership at the highest levels. When the Senate vote was announced, confirming my appointment to the Joint Chiefs of Staff by an overwhelming margin, I became the highest-ranking military officer ever produced by Cedar Falls, Iowa. The achievement represented not just personal vindication but validation of every choice I'd made since leaving home to pursue military service. The swearing-in ceremony was conducted at the Pentagon with senior government officials and military leadership present, but also with my family in attendance for the first time since my commissioning ceremony decades earlier. Mom, Dad, Jake, and Emma sat in the front row, watching as I took the oath that would make me one of the most senior military leaders in the country. After the ceremony, as we gathered for the traditional reception, Dad approached me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that might have been pride mixed with regret and perhaps a touch of awe. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice lacking the confidence that had characterized our previous interactions. "I was wrong about your military service, wrong about what you were accomplishing, wrong about everything." His admission was more than I'd ever expected to receive, acknowledgement that the choices I'd made and the path I'd pursued had been not just valid but exceptional. "Dad, I never needed you to understand what I was doing," I replied. "I just needed you to respect that it mattered to me." "It clearly mattered to a lot more people than just you," he said, gesturing toward the reception filled with senior government officials and military leaders who had come to honor my appointment. "I'm proud of you, Sarah, and I'm sorry it took this long for me to say it." The conversation that followed was the most honest and meaningful exchange we'd had since my decision to enlist 25 years earlier. For the first time, he asked substantive questions about my experiences, my responsibilities, and my plans for serving in this new position. The interest seemed genuine rather than obligatory, driven by recognition that he'd been wrong about everything he'd assumed about my military career. As the reception concluded and my family prepared to return to Cedar Falls, I realized that the vindication I'd received went beyond personal satisfaction to encompass validation of every woman who had chosen military service despite family opposition, every soldier who had persevered despite lack of understanding from loved ones, every person who had pursued their calling despite criticism from those who couldn't comprehend their choices. The woman who had left Cedar Falls as a disappointed daughter trying to prove herself had become a senior leader whose decisions would affect national security and whose example would inspire future generations of military officers. The garage, where I'd learned to change oil, had become the foundation for a career that would influence American military policy at the highest levels of government. Standing in the Pentagon reception hall, surrounded by colleagues who understood and respected my achievements, I finally understood that home had never been a place I needed to return to but rather something I'd been building throughout my military career. My family was the soldiers I'd led and mentored, the fellow officers who had supported my advancement, and the institution that had provided opportunities for growth and service that exceeded anything I could have imagined in my father's garage. The Joint Chiefs appointment represented not an ending but a beginning, the start of a new phase of service that would allow me to shape military policy and strategic planning at levels that could affect international security and global stability. The skills I'd learned from Dad about problem solving and attention to detail had evolved into capabilities for strategic thinking and organizational leadership that would serve national interests for years to come. Most importantly, I'd learned that respect and recognition couldn't be demanded or pursued but had to be earned through consistent excellence and unwavering commitment to principles that transcended personal relationships and family expectations. The approval I'd once desperately sought from my father had become irrelevant compared to the satisfaction of serving something larger than myself and contributing to causes that would outlast any individual recognition or achievement. As my family departed for their flight back to Iowa, carrying with them a new understanding of what I'd accomplished and why it mattered, I returned to my Pentagon office to begin preparing for responsibilities that would define the next phase of my career. The daughter who had disappointed her father by choosing military service had become a leader whose decisions would help protect the freedoms that allowed small-town automotive repair shops to thrive in communities like Cedar Falls. The circle was complete, but the journey was far from over. The months following my confirmation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff transformed not only my own understanding of what I'd achieved, but fundamentally altered how my family viewed military service and its place in American society. The daughter, who had once been dismissed as playing soldier, was now regularly consulted by the president on matters of national security, appearing on news programs to discuss strategic military issues, and representing American interests in meetings with international military leaders. My first major assignment as a member of the Joint Chiefs involved developing logistics strategies for a complex humanitarian crisis in Eastern Europe, where American military forces were coordinating with NATO allies to provide disaster relief. Following devastating earthquakes, the operation required managing supply chains across multiple countries, coordinating with civilian relief organizations, and ensuring that military resources were deployed effectively while maintaining readiness for other potential missions. The strategic planning sessions took place in secure conference rooms deep within the Pentagon, where I worked alongside other senior military leaders to balance humanitarian objectives with broader security considerations. The decisions we made would affect thousands of civilian lives while influencing America's relationships with European allies and demonstrating our military's capability to respond rapidly to international crises. During one particularly intense planning session, General Patricia Martinez, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, turned to me for analysis of the logistics challenges involved in establishing supply depots across multiple international borders. General Thompson, your experience managing complex supply operations gives you unique insight into what's actually possible under these conditions, she said. What's your assessment of the timeline and resource requirements? Drawing on decades of experience managing military logistics under challenging conditions, I provided detailed analysis of transportation bottlenecks, storage requirements, and coordination challenges that would affect the operation's success. My recommendations influenced the final operational plan and demonstrated the value of having senior leaders with extensive practical experience in the positions they now occupied. The successful completion of the humanitarian operation earned recognition from international partners and demonstrated American military capability in ways that enhanced our strategic relationships worldwide. More importantly, it validated my appointment to the Joint Chiefs and proved that my technical background and operational experience provided valuable perspectives for strategic decision-making at the highest levels. The media coverage of the operation included interviews with affected civilians who expressed gratitude for American assistance, analysis from military experts who praised the efficiency of our response, and commentary from international observers who noted the sophistication of our logistics coordination. Watching news reports about an operation I'd helped plan and execute provided a profound sense of satisfaction that extended far beyond personal achievement. My family's reaction to seeing me interviewed on national television about the humanitarian operation revealed how completely their understanding of my career had changed. Mom called the evening after a particularly detailed news segment to express amazement at my ability to discuss complex international issues with confidence and authority. Sarah, watching you on television explaining military strategy to those reporters, I realized I never understood what you actually do, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and regret. You sound like you're making decisions that affect the entire world. Mom, I've been making decisions that affect military operations for 20 years, I replied gently. The only difference now is that the scope is larger and the decisions are more visible. Her admission that she'd never understood the nature of my responsibilities reflected a broader pattern of civilian misunderstanding about military service and its complexities. The gap between public perception of military work and its actual demands had contributed to my family's inability to appreciate my achievements until they became impossible to ignore. Dad's transformation was even more dramatic, progressing from polite interest to genuine curiosity about my work and its implications. During our phone conversations, he began asking detailed questions about military operations, strategic planning, and international relations that demonstrated serious engagement with subjects he'd previously dismissed as irrelevant to civilian life. "Sarah, I've been reading about that humanitarian operation you were involved in," he said during one call. "The newspaper said American forces delivered supplies to over 1 million people in just 2 weeks. How do you coordinate something that complex?" His question provided an opportunity to explain the strategic thinking and organizational coordination required for large-scale military operations, drawing parallels between his experience managing multiple automotive repair projects and my responsibility for coordinating resources across multiple countries and organizations. "Dad, it's similar to what you do when you manage several major repairs simultaneously," I explained. "You have to coordinate parts delivery, schedule technicians, communicate with customers, and ensure quality standards while meeting deadlines. Military logistics involves the same principles applied to much larger scales with higher stakes." The comparison seemed to resonate with him in ways that previous explanations had never achieved, providing a framework for understanding military operations through concepts he could relate to from his own professional experience. For the first time, our conversations about my work became genuine exchanges rather than polite inquiries followed by quick topic changes. Jake's reaction to my increased public visibility was particularly gratifying, as he began incorporating my achievements into his own identity in ways that suggested genuine pride rather than obligation. His colleagues at the technology company where he worked had seen news coverage of my appointment and began asking him about his sister's military career. "Sarah, you've become sort of famous at my office," he told me during one conversation. "People keep asking me what it's like having a sister on the Joint Chiefs. I have to admit, I'm finally learning to appreciate what you've accomplished." His admission that he was learning to appreciate my achievements revealed how little any of my family had understood about my career trajectory or its significance. The recognition from strangers and media attention had provided external validation that forced them to reconsider assumptions they'd maintained for decades. Emma's response was perhaps the most emotional, as she struggled to reconcile her previous indifference with her growing understanding of what I'd achieved. During one particularly honest conversation, she apologized for years of treating my military service as an inconvenience that interfered with family gatherings and celebrations. "Sarah, I need to tell you how sorry I am," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "All those times I complained about you missing holidays or family events, I never understood that you were serving something bigger than our personal convenience." Her apology meant more to me than she probably realized, acknowledgement that the sacrifices I'd made for military service had been meaningful rather than selfish choices that prioritized career over family relationships. The validation helped heal wounds that had festered for years beneath the surface of our interactions. The most significant change in family dynamics occurred during my first visit to Cedar Falls after the Joint Chiefs appointment, when Dad arranged for me to speak at the high school about military service and career opportunities. The invitation represented a complete reversal of his previous attitude toward my military achievements and demonstrated his growing understanding of their value. The presentation was scheduled for a morning assembly with the entire student body present, providing an opportunity to discuss military service with young people who might be considering their own post-graduation options. As I prepared my remarks, I thought about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's presentation years earlier that had changed the course of my life and hoped to provide similar inspiration for students facing their own career decisions. Walking into the same auditorium where I'd first learned about military opportunities felt like completing a circle that had begun with teenage uncertainty and evolved into senior leadership responsibilities. The students who filled the seats represented the same mixture of curiosity, ambition, and uncertainty I'd felt during my own high school years. My presentation covered the educational opportunities available through military service, the leadership development programs that had shaped my career, and the technical training that had provided the foundation for everything I'd accomplished. I described the places I'd served, the people I'd worked with, and the operations I'd been part of, painting a comprehensive picture of military service as both challenging and rewarding. During the question and answer session that followed, students asked thoughtful questions about the demands of military life, the compatibility of service with family relationships, and the types of career opportunities available to people with different interests and aptitudes. Their engagement reminded me of my own curiosity during Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's presentation and the transformative power of exposing young people to possibilities they might never have considered. One student, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez who reminded me of myself at that age, asked about the challenges of pursuing military service despite family opposition. Her question suggested personal relevance that went beyond academic curiosity and provided an opportunity to address the conflicts that had shaped my own early military experience. The most important thing to remember, I told her, is that the people who love you want what's best for you, even when they don't understand your choices. Sometimes pursuing your calling requires accepting that others may not immediately appreciate your decisions, but living authentically is more important than living according to others' expectations. Her nod of understanding and the intensity of her attention suggested that my words had resonated in ways that might influence her own future decisions. The possibility that my presentation might inspire another young person to pursue military service despite family doubts provided a sense of completing the cycle that had begun with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's influence on my own choices. After the presentation, Dad waited in the hallway to walk with me to the parking lot, his expression reflecting pride that he'd never shown during my previous visits to Cedar Falls. The transformation in his attitude was remarkable, from dismissive indifference to genuine appreciation for my achievements and their significance. "Sarah, watching you speak to those students, I finally understood something I should have realized years ago," he said as we reached my rental car. "You didn't leave Cedar Falls to reject what I taught you. You took what I taught you and applied it to serving something bigger than either of us could have imagined." His insight captured something important about the continuity between my childhood experiences in his garage and my current responsibilities for national security. The problem-solving skills, attention to detail, and work ethic he'd instilled had provided the foundation for everything I'd accomplished, even when applied in contexts he couldn't have anticipated. "Dad, everything I learned about leadership came from watching you manage your business and treat people with respect," I replied. "The scale is different now, but the principles are the same." The conversation that followed was the most meaningful exchange we'd ever had about my military career and its relationship to the values he'd tried to instill during my childhood. For the first time, he seemed to understand that my choice of military service had been an extension of rather than a rejection of his influence. The visit to Cedar Falls also included a tour of Thompson's Auto Repair, where Dad proudly introduced me to employees and customers as his daughter, the General. The title carried weight and respect that transformed how people interacted with both of us, creating opportunities for conversations about military service and national security that would have been impossible during previous visits. Meeting the employees who had replaced me in the family business provided perspective on the path I'd chosen not to take and the opportunities I'd created by pursuing military service instead. The young mechanics working in the garage possessed technical skills and dedication that reminded me of my own early enthusiasm for automotive repair, but their horizons were limited to local concerns and immediate problems. The contrast between their daily challenges and my responsibilities for international operations demonstrated the dramatic differences in scope and impact between civilian and military careers. While both involved technical expertise and problem-solving abilities, military service had provided opportunities for leadership and influence that would have been impossible in any civilian context available in Cedar Falls. During my final evening in town, the family gathered for dinner at the house where I'd grown up, creating an opportunity for conversation that revealed how much our relationships had evolved since my Joint Chiefs appointment. The awkward silences and polite deflections that had characterized previous family interactions were replaced by genuine curiosity and meaningful exchange. Emma asked detailed questions about my responsibilities and decision-making authority, while Jake inquired about the technological aspects of modern military operations and their relationship to civilian innovations. Mom wanted to understand the personal demands of senior leadership and how I managed stress and pressure in such a high-stakes environment. Most significantly, Dad engaged with serious questions about strategic planning, international relations, and the challenges of coordinating military operations with diplomatic objectives. His questions demonstrated genuine interest in understanding my work rather than simply being polite about career choices he couldn't appreciate. "Sarah, when you're making decisions about military operations, how do you balance what's militarily effective with what's politically acceptable?" he asked during one particularly detailed discussion. His question revealed sophisticated understanding of the complexities involved in senior military leadership and demonstrated that he'd been thinking seriously about the nature of my responsibilities. The conversation that followed covered topics ranging from civilian control of military forces to the relationship between military advice and political decision-making. The evening concluded with Dad presenting me with a gift that symbolized his evolving understanding of my career and its significance. He'd had a custom tool set created with my name and rank engraved on each piece, designed specifically for precision work on complex mechanical systems. "I know you probably don't do hands-on mechanical work anymore," he said as I examined the beautifully crafted tools. But I wanted you to have something that represents where you started and reminds you that the skills you learned here are still part of who you are. The gesture was more meaningful than any elaborate gift could have been, acknowledgement that my military achievements were built upon the foundation he'd provided and that both of us had contributed to my success in different but important ways. The tools represented continuity rather than departure, connection rather than separation. Returning to Washington after that visit, I carried with me a sense of resolution and peace that had been absent from family relationships for over 25 years. The conflicts and misunderstandings that had characterized my military career had been replaced by mutual respect and genuine appreciation for both my achievements and the sacrifices they had required. My work on the Joint Chiefs continued to expand in scope and complexity, with responsibilities that included strategic planning for potential conflicts, coordination with international military partners, and advice to civilian leadership on matters affecting national security. Each assignment reinforced my understanding of how far I'd progressed from the young woman who had left Cedar Falls with uncertain dreams and fierce determination. The humanitarian operation in Eastern Europe was followed by involvement in strategic planning for military assistance to allies facing regional security threats, coordination of joint training exercises with NATO partners, and development of new approaches to logistics support for special operations forces. Each project drew upon different aspects of my experience while contributing to my continued professional development. The most rewarding aspect of my Joint Chiefs service was the opportunity to mentor younger officers who were following career paths similar to my own. During meetings with rising military leaders, I shared lessons learned from my own experiences, while encouraging them to pursue their own professional development with confidence and determination. One particularly meaningful mentoring relationship developed with Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos, a logistics officer whose background and career trajectory reminded me of my own journey 20 years earlier. Like me, she had faced family skepticism about her military service and struggled to balance professional ambitions with personal relationships. General Thompson, how did you maintain confidence in your choices when the people closest to you didn't understand or support what you were doing? She asked during one of our conversations. Her question brought back memories of my own doubts and uncertainties during the early years of my military career, when family disapproval had created constant internal conflict about the path I'd chosen. The opportunity to provide guidance based on my own experiences felt like completing a cycle of mentorship that had begun with Colonel Rodriguez's influence on my own development. Colonel Santos, the most important thing I learned is that you can't base your sense of self-worth on other people's ability to understand your choices, I replied. Live authentically according to your own values and calling, and eventually, the results will speak for themselves. Our conversation covered topics ranging from managing family relationships while pursuing demanding military careers to developing the confidence necessary for senior leadership positions. The advice I provided drew heavily on lessons learned through my own struggles with family acceptance and professional recognition. The mentoring relationship proved mutually beneficial, as Colonel Santos's questions and perspectives helped me reflect on my own journey and understand how my experiences might benefit other military leaders facing similar challenges. Her success in subsequent assignments provided satisfaction that extended beyond personal achievement to encompass contribution to the next generation of military leaders. As my tenure on the Joint Chiefs progressed, I began receiving invitations to speak at military academies, war colleges, and civilian universities about leadership development, strategic planning, and the evolution of military careers in the modern era. These presentations provided opportunities to share lessons learned while inspiring future military leaders to pursue their own professional development with determination and vision. One particularly memorable presentation was delivered at the Army War College, where I had completed my own advanced military education years earlier. Standing before an audience of senior officers preparing for general officer responsibilities, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from a small-town garage to the highest levels of military leadership. The path from lieutenant to general officer is neither linear nor predictable, I told the assembled officers. Success requires technical competence, but it demands much more: strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, moral courage, and the ability to inspire others to achieve objectives they didn't know were possible. The presentation covered the importance of continuous learning, the value of diverse experiences, and the necessity of maintaining personal integrity while navigating complex organizational dynamics. The questions that followed revealed the same concerns and ambitions I'd experienced during my own military education, providing opportunities to offer guidance based on practical experience. The most significant recognition of my Joint Chiefs service came during my third year in the position, when I was selected to deliver the keynote address at the annual conference of the Association of the United States Army The invitation represented acknowledgement of my expertise and influence within the military community, providing a platform to discuss strategic challenges facing American military forces. My address focused on the evolution of military logistics in an era of rapid technological change, drawing upon decades of experience managing increasingly complex supply operations while adapting to new capabilities and requirements. The presentation covered everything from artificial intelligence applications in supply chain management to the strategic implications of cyber warfare for military logistics. The audience included senior military leaders, defense industry executives, congressional representatives, and international military partners, providing an opportunity to influence policy discussions and strategic planning at the highest levels. The positive reception of my remarks confirmed my standing as a recognized expert in military logistics and strategic planning. Following the conference, I received numerous invitations to participate in policy discussions, strategic planning sessions, and educational programs that would extend my influence beyond my formal Joint Chiefs responsibilities. The opportunities represented validation of my expertise while providing platforms for continued contribution to military effectiveness and national security. Perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in the form of a letter from Jennifer Martinez, the high school student who had asked about pursuing military service despite family opposition. She wrote to inform me that my presentation had inspired her to accept an appointment to the United States Military Academy, despite initial resistance from her parents. General Thompson, your words about living authentically and pursuing your calling gave me the courage to follow my own dreams, she wrote. I hope someday to serve with the same dedication and integrity you've demonstrated throughout your career. Her letter provided confirmation that my achievements had meaning beyond personal satisfaction, that my example might inspire other young women to pursue military service and contribute to national security through their own unique talents and perspectives. The possibility of influencing future military leaders provided a sense of legacy that transcended individual accomplishments. As I prepared for the conclusion of my Joint Chiefs service and transition to retirement, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred not only in my own life but in the relationships that had shaped my understanding of family, service, and personal fulfillment. The daughter who had left Cedar Falls seeking approval and validation had become a leader whose achievements commanded respect and admiration from military colleagues, civilian officials, and family members who had once dismissed her choices. The final family gathering before my retirement was held at the house on Elm Street, with all family members present to celebrate not just my military service but the healing of relationships that had been strained for decades. The conversation flowed easily between topics ranging from military strategy to automotive technology, with mutual respect and genuine interest replacing the awkward politeness that had characterized previous interactions. Dad's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable, as he had evolved from dismissive skepticism to genuine pride in my achievements and sincere interest in my experiences. During our final conversation about my military career, he offered an apology that addressed years of misunderstanding and conflict. Sarah, I want you to know that I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, he said, his voice carrying emotion I'd rarely heard before. I was wrong to discourage your military service, wrong to dismiss your achievements, and wrong to prioritize my own expectations over your dreams and calling. His acknowledgement meant more to me than any professional recognition could have. Validation from the person whose approval I'd sought longest and whose understanding had seemed most impossible to achieve. The reconciliation provided closure that allowed me to transition to retirement with peace rather than regret about family relationships. My retirement ceremony was conducted at the Pentagon with senior government officials, military leaders, and family members present to honor my 30 years of military service. The citation accompanying my final military decoration summarized achievements that spanned from enlisted mechanic to member of the Joint Chiefs, recognizing contributions to national security at every level of responsibility. As I stood before the assembled audience, receiving final recognition for decades of service, I thought about the young woman who had left Cedar Falls with uncertain dreams and fierce determination. The journey from automotive garage to Pentagon conference room had been longer and more challenging than I could have imagined, but it had resulted in achievements that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The girl who had learned to change oil filters had become a strategic leader whose decisions affected international security, whose expertise influenced military policy at the highest levels, and whose example inspired future generations of military officers. The path I'd chosen despite family opposition had led to recognition and fulfillment that would have been impossible in any alternative career. Most importantly, I'd learned that respect and approval couldn't be demanded or pursued but had to be earned through consistent excellence, unwavering integrity, and commitment to principles that transcended personal relationships and immediate gratification. The vindication I'd received was satisfying not because it proved my family wrong, but because it validated choices made for the right reasons despite external pressure and doubt. Standing in the Pentagon reception hall after my retirement ceremony, surrounded by military colleagues who had become my chosen family and blood relatives who had finally learned to appreciate my achievements, I understood that the journey from rejection to recognition had been worthwhile not for its destination but for its transformative power. The woman retiring from military service was fundamentally different from the girl who had enlisted decades earlier, shaped by experiences that had tested every aspect of her character and capabilities. The future stretched ahead with possibilities for continued service and contribution, whether through consulting, education, or public service that would draw upon decades of military experience. The skills developed through military service would continue to provide value long after retirement, applied to challenges and opportunities that would extend my impact beyond the formal end of my military career. As family members and colleagues began to depart and the reception concluded, I carried with me gratitude for opportunities received, pride in achievements earned, and confidence in the value of choices made despite opposition and uncertainty. The garage where I'd learned my first lessons about problem-solving and dedication had provided the foundation for a career that had exceeded every expectation and dream. The woman who had once desperately sought her father's approval had learned to find validation through service to something larger than herself, creating a legacy that would outlast any individual recognition or achievement. The journey from Cedar Falls to the Pentagon had been worth every sacrifice, every challenge, and every moment of doubt, resulting in a life lived with purpose, integrity, and ultimately, recognition that transcended personal satisfaction to encompass contribution to causes that mattered far beyond any individual ambition. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.